Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. If you are here because you're looking for our regular clinical programming, then you will be surprised because this is actually a tutorial for my statistics students. If you are a student and you're here to check out the tutorial, then certainly you're welcome to look around the regular site and see the kind of program that I and my friend Brett Newcomb put together. And if you do that, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that subscribe button. So let's start doing some statistics. You are asked to create a draft of a memo that is going to go out to an organization, a not-for-profit organization that is trying to elicit bigger donations. This is incredibly apropos since this is the 25th or 26th of March in 2013 that I'm recording this, and NPR just did lay off 10% of their staff and have a huge shortfall in their budget, and they are looking to improve their donations. And so this is something that could be going on right now. You could literally be writing this memo to NPR right now. So it's a very, very relevant assignment. But in addition to the summary, so first let me say one thing. The goal of the memo is not to try and track ways of creating empathy, but is to track the amount of empathy that is represented in different classes to target the marketing proposals to those sections of the population that might be most receptive to the message. Okay, so one of the things that we want to do is graph the qualitative data. So qualitative data is just yes or no, positive or negative. It doesn't have anything else associated with it mathematically. So then qualitative data or quantitative, so we're doing qualitative data. Quantitative data does have the math associated with it. So we're going to create one graph for qualitative data, yes or no, one graph for quantitative data, which has some math associated with it. So the data that we have that is qualitative, yes or no, is class. Class doesn't have any other math associated with it, and so we want to make a pie chart that's going to show us the distribution of the respondents by class. Now, we know that in our last assignment we had to create a table, a frequency table, so we're going to do that again. And so I'm just going to click on this, which is going to be 08. So when I click on a box, then you can see over here the corresponding box gets highlighted. So if I click on O a little further up, this 4 gets highlighted. If I click on O a little further down, then this 12 gets highlighted. So that's important to know. We're going to use that in just a few minutes when we do our next graph, but right now it doesn't matter where I put this, so I'm just going to click somewhere, and this is going to be 08. You see 08, and in this box I'm going to type lower. So the first class is the lower class, and then I'm going to click on the next box, and you can see now this is 09, and I'm going to type working. And then below that I'm going to type middle, and below that I'm going to type upper. So these are the 4 class designations that are coded in your data here under class, but they're coded as 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I put 1, 2, 3, 4 in this table, then the table is going to have in the legend 1, 2, 3, 4. So when you make a graph and you see in that legend that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, that means that this information, the information that is telling Excel what to put in the legend, is just numeric. Now there may be times when you may want that and you may have to change those labels later, but for our purposes, we can type this information, so we get lower working, middle, and upper class. And now we have to know how many 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s there are. And so if I look here, you can see the first entry doesn't enter on number 1 row. And that's because the number 1 row are our title headings. So if I look at this data, I can see that the first data entry is on the second. So if I click that box, that is the second row. So that's important because when I go down and see how many of these there are, this is where it stops, and so that's 38. So I don't have 38 responses. I have 37 because the first row is occupied by this title of class. All right, so make sure you don't make that mistake. So I'm looking at 38, so that means I have 37 respondents in this lower class. So I'm going to type 37 here. And now I need to figure out middle, working, and upper classes. And so what I would do is I look at this and I say, okay, this stops at 38. And then where does 2 end at? So it's a long entry because there's a lot of these. Okay, 2 ends at 336. So if I take 336, I'm going to do this right now, 336, and I subtract 38, and you can't see my calculator, but I'm going to actually do it in real time, so I already know what the answer is, but I'm going to do it just like you would do it. So you'd say 336 minus 38, and you get 298, which is the number for the amount of 2s. And so we go back up to our frequency chart. Our 2s are representing the working class, so I'm going to type 298 in there. Now, I also know that for my middle class, I'm going to have 305. You would have to do the math for that. And then finally, for my upper class, I have 20. And so this is the frequency table that we're going to use to make our graph. And now what I have to do is select all this data. So I'm dragging and dropping from the upper left corner of this box to the lower right corner of this box so that I highlight all of my frequency table, and then I'm just going to go up to insert. I'm going to click on insert. And then I'm going to go over here to where it has insert pie or donut chart. And I have some selections. I can do a 2D pie chart. I can do a 3D pie chart. We're just going to do a standard pie chart. We're going to click on that, and boom, there is our graph. And you can see we've got lower working, middle, and upper all here. And that is the representation of this data. Now, I'm not done, because as you can see, my chart title is not filled out for me. So I'm going to click up in this box and I'm going to delete this information, and I'm going to type respondents by race. And boom, now I have a title for my graph, respondents by race. Now this looks pretty good, and if you turn this in, you get full credit, all right? But there are still some things that we can do, and so I'm going to show you some additional things that can help you out. This right here is my chart elements, and we have chart title, that's this box. We have legend, that's this box, okay? Now, I can change these things, so I could put my legend on the left-hand side, or I can put it on the bottom where it was, put it on the top, so you can move your legend around and just kind of pick what you think looks best for you. I'm just going to leave it at the bottom, that's where we had it. But I can also add this data label. When I do that, boom, now I've got numbers on my chart, which actually might be something that you might be interested in. You might be interested in having the numbers appear, and so if you are interested in that, that's how you turn that function on. Now I can look at my style, and I have lots of different ways that Excel is pre-programmed to represent your data. We're just going to leave it where it's at. If you look at on the internet, you can even find additional style templates that you can download. You don't have to do that. I mean, it's completely up to you. Okay, so let's go back up to my chart elements. So on my data labels, I have some additional options that I can use there. So I click on that check mark, and that's what gives me these numbers inside my pie slices. But I have some other things that I can do. So I can move these numbers around. You can see I can put them in the center. You can put them just inside. You can put them outside. You can do best fit, which is how it starts. It always starts on best fit. But then I can click this data call out. If I click the data call out, now instead of the numbers, I get percentages. And that might actually be something that you might be interested in. So you might say, okay, that's the way that I want my graph to be labeled. So then this graph is complete, and this is an A+ graph because it's got not only the raw data information represented just in the pie graph, which is full credit for the assignment, but now I've added even some additional information because I've got the percentages on there. Okay, so that is for the pie chart. Now we also have another chart that we need to graph. So we just graphed the qualitative data. We just graphed data that was yes or no, black or white. It doesn't have any other kind of information associated with it. But I also need to graph a qualitative graph. So the best qualitative graph that I can create is a graph that charts the total mean of empathic responses per class, because that's going to tell me which class is best to target for my marketing campaign. So you have all of these different numbered empathy, different call-outs, and these are different empathy questions, and you can chart any of those, and that's totally fine. But if I really want the best answer, then what I want is this total here, this empathy average column. So now I need to make a distribution chart for this, but I need to do it based on what the empathy average is. So that means I'm going to have to figure out the average of these per class. So let's go back over here. I have my 4 classes, right? So I have lower class, I have working class, I have middle class, and I have upper class. Now, remember I told you if I put words in here, then a histogram's not going to read that. It's not going to read that well. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave my titles alone, and I'm going to now figure out what is the average of each of my classes. So I have a statistical average. Each of these rows represents a single individual. So you could chart any of these individual empathy questions separately, but that wouldn't give you as much information as if you charted the average. So each individual has an average empathy score, which is here, but I can't just report this. I'd have too much information. So I need to figure out what is the average of this average for my 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s. That sounds weird and confusing, but that's what we're going to do. Okay, so if I want to know what is the average of all my 1s, then I'm going to enter that data in here. So I'm going to highlight this box, and I'm going to go up to FX, and I'm going to click on average and say okay. Now it wants to know what is the range of data that you want to use to figure out this average. So remember, this is my empathy average data. it's on column N, so I want to figure out what is the average of the scores of all the ones. So my scores start at N2. Remember, the first one is the title box, so my data starts at N2. So the first number that I need here is N2. And then I have to tell it what the range is, and so the range, telling it what the range is done by hitting colon. So N2 to where does my data stop? It stops at N38, because remember I have 38 responses, right? Or 37 responses, so it goes down to N38. So my next number is N38. And if I hit OK, then boom, I get the average of all my ones. So for working class, I'm going to select that box next to working. I'm going to hit F2, average, OK, and I need to tell it what the range is. So the range for all of my 2's is N39 colon N336. Now, you could figure that out on your own. I would encourage you to do that, but I have already done that work, so I'm not going to show you. I've already showed you how to figure out where you are on the Excel spreadsheet, but we're going to say OK here, and we've got our average for all the 2's. My average for the 3's, I click the box next to my middle, and I go to average and OK. Now, the range for the 3's is N337 colon N641. I say OK, and boom, I've got the average for all my 3's. Now I'm going to do it for my 4's, same thing, except the range for my 4's is N642 colon N661. And I say OK, and boom. So now I've got the averages for all of my classes. So this is qualitative data. When we were just tracking number of respondents by race, that was qualitative data. Now this is quantitative data, data that has arithmetic in it. So let's select this chart. Okay, so if I select my chart, and this time I go to Insert, and I go to Insert Column or Bar Chart. So I've got all of these different choices. I'm going to go ahead and do this because I think this sideways presentation looks better. And am I done? No. Now I do have my upper, middle, working, and lower, so that's right, but I don't have a title. So I got to click on my title, and I'm going to put in empathy average by race, by class, doggone it. So, empty average by class, and I've got my graph all completed here. If you turn this in, then obviously that's an A. I could do some things that would make this a little bit more readable. Like this looks like that the lower class has empathy that's way above. Now if we look at these actual numbers over here, there is really very little difference in the distribution. This may be significant or it may not. We haven't done any statistical tests to figure that out. But this is a pretty graphic representation, or a pretty stark representation. But what I can do here is I can change on my chart elements I can change the way that this is represented. So right now this is represented with the minimum being 3.9. What if we made the minimum 2 and we made the maximum 5? How does that change things, right? Boom. So now this is the minimum is 2, the maximum now is 5, and you can see how that has really radically changed the look of my chart. I can also do what I did before, which was to enter in those data labels, and now I can see there'd be no reason to enter in, and you can see I don't even have it as an option, the percentages, because this would not be information that would, where percentages would be relevant, okay? But if I say, okay, that looks pretty good, and now I am done, this is a perfect graph for the quantitative data, which is empathy average. So the quantitative data being data that has additional math associated with it. So if I look at this, then obviously what I would immediately deduce is that the lower class has the greatest empathy, and as you go up, there's less empathy that is shown, which is probably a factual representation of psychology that would make sense in psychological terms, but doesn't make sense from a monetary standpoint. Targeting the lower class may or may not be a good idea. They may be the most empathetic, but they may have the least amount of disposable income. So I may want to say, oh, well, because there just doesn't seem to be a huge difference in the amount of empathy, and because I got very, very small responses in the lower class and the upper class, maybe I still want to target the upper class. That's perfectly fine. That's a well thought out argument. But ideally, what we're going to take away from this is that the working and the middle class are probably the areas, the populations that I want to target the most, because they have high empathy levels and maybe the individuals who have the disposable income or have enough disposable income that they would be willing to make a donation. All right, so I hope that that is beneficial. If you guys have any questions, obviously reach out to me. Again, you can look around the site and hit that subscribe button. I would appreciate that. Otherwise, I will see you in class.